to you to get this conversation going. Your microphone is on the side.
Guesting. Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. Can I ask everybody to come to the front so we fall from the front and make it a nice, cozy discussion? So this afternoon we're starting where we finished off last night. And that was on what the present is and what we think we can achieve with this book. But a lot of the younger people, and that's why I was hoping more younger people come in, don't know about our roots going back before Roshnee began. And one of the places that a community thrived, grew up, and basically was a cultural hub. And last night I said, very similar to what we had in Sophia Town and many other places across the country. And that is the Asiatic Bazaar, as it was officially called, and or top location. So we're going to start off by asking our two panelists here what their interpretation of or understanding was of that settlement. I'll start off with age, Uncle Percy. Oh,
hello. Haroun, where would you like me to start?
I would say we don't have a lot of time, so probably what the settlement was about, what was top location like, and what you remember.
Well, Haroun, I must be very, very honest. I'm not going to do justice if you confine my time limit, because I was born in top location 80 years ago. And if I can start talking about top location, it's going to take the whole afternoon, Haroun. The challenges that we faced, the triumphs, the difficulties, and the conditions under which we lived, and how we overcame it. And if I need to start, I need to start somewhere. Top location, Asiatic Bazaar, was where the new hotel, what's that? The Formula One hotel was. As you come out of Vereniging on the left-hand side, the Formula One hotel, that's where the old Asiatic Bazaar was. Now, right next to us there was the colored location, and right next to it was the African location. But I must tell you something, we talk about Ubuntu today. Ubuntu started in the 50s and the 60s. The 50s and 60s. And we lived side by side with no animosity. In fact, it was so safe. If you drove your car and you parked it outside with your key, if you forgot your car keys in the car, tomorrow morning you get up, your car is still waiting for you there. There was no problems that we are facing like today. But having said that, the municipality leased the ground in the Asiatic Bazaar, to the Indians. 50 square meters. We paid 50-cent stand fees every month, 50-cent stand fees. They gave you the land, they gave you no facilities, no water, no sewer system, etc. So we hired this for 50 cents a month from the Vereniging municipality, and we had to build with our own costs. We had to make do with the old latrine system, the bucket system. The older people will probably remember what I'm talking about.
Uncle Percy, if I can just ask Rafiq to do his introduction and then I'll come back.
You're welcome, you're welcome.
Rafiq, do you want to give us your recollections of early top location?
Very briefly, Haroun. Of course, I'm from a different generation from Uncle Percy, maybe 2 generations down. So whilst Uncle Percy was in his prime in location as a businessman and a community member, I was still a kid. I spent, I think, about 10 years in location before we moved to Roshnee in '68. So interestingly enough, in the book, they enumerate 87 of the first stands in Roshnee, and we were one of the first people then to have moved to Roshnee. But my childhood years from grade 1 to about standard 4, I lived in location, and I remember it very, very clearly, although, I'm much older now. I remember it because I think the atmosphere in which we grew up in those days is so vastly different from what the kids grow up in today. And it's sometimes hard to describe to them this term mohabbat that we use, which is a Gujarati term. You can't, it's almost impossible to literally translate it to the kids today because their generation is so different. If I take my grandson, he's only 2 years old, but he's already on the iPad. And I remember very clearly when I was a kid in, say, standard 1 or 2, we were playing in the streets in location, which were dirt streets, a game called Gilli Danda. So I don't know, so people from the older generation remember what's a Gilli Danda. For those who don't, it's a very simple game in which you have a stick, which is like a wooden broomstick thick, but about maybe 30 centimeters long, and another one which is narrower, and you dig a hole in the ground, and you kind of squirt it out. So those are the kind of games we played. Also, as Uncle Percy's mentioned, that there was no sewage system. So very, maybe a distasteful fact from those times is that the locations, there were no toilets with flushing toilets. So the toilets were usually out in the courtyard, and you would usually have to go into the toilet and step up onto the toilet, and there would be a bucket. It was a bucket system. So those who live at that time will understand what I mean. You used to get a truck coming around every week and collecting all the buckets which you use for your toilet. So that's one interesting aspect. The other thing was that, look, in those days, there was no school in the location. We used to go to town school, and we called it town school, because in the location, interestingly enough, and Uncle Percy might correct me here, there was a school, but that was a colored school in the so-called Indian section, because the way the location was situated was, you had the Indians on one side, there was a road, and then on the other side was the coloreds. It was just a street, it was not a road. But the school we had there was built on concrete blocks. It was wooden, prefabricated huts that were placed onto concrete blocks, and you had to get up a step in to get into the class. So, Haroun, please stop if I'm going too far.
No, that's what I was just going to. I think what you've touched on is a very nice sort of place to go back to Uncle Percy. And Uncle Percy, what I want to know is that typically a day in a life of top location. What would you say? I can picture the early days, when I was a small guy, possibly like Rafiq was, and people got up to go to town. I saw people walking to town. There were those that cycled to town or stood on your corner hitching a lift into town. And then the school kids went to school there, and they walked back from school. And also the people went to do their work in town. And then obviously madrasa was in location. So if you just want to picture and remember a day in a typical day in the life of Roshnee.
Well, Haroun, a typical day in the old Ashedik Bazaar was a very, very interesting day and a very colorful day. Colorful in this respect, in the morning, because town was so near to the old Ashedik Bazaar, most of us walked to school. The school was where the present mosque in town is. The classes were on top. So we used to walk to school. Some of us that had parents who had motor cars, their parents took them to school. Coming back from school in the afternoon, Rafiq hit on something there when he spoke about that, what's it, Giliganda.
Gililanda, yes.
Now, that occupied our time. Then, of course, sport. What was sport? Football. Now, those days, we had a football that you had to lace up. And 9 out of 10 times, the ball was skew. But that didn't make no difference to us. We played football. We enjoyed ourselves till the street lights. The street lights, not our own lights, the street lights came on. Dull lights. Our parents used to come and say, come and wash, come and bath, have supper and do your homework. That was a typical day. But I must tell you, right next to the old Asiatic Bazaar was the colored location, and on the other side was the African location. But the intermixing between the various sections is phenomenal. Many of our children schooled in the Bantu schools in Vereniging. Many of the teachers that taught in our schools were from the colored location. I can mention quite a few names. So it wasn't a question of discrimination, it was just a matter of merit and ability. If a teacher was good, they didn't care, the community didn't care which section of the community he comes from, as long as he can deliver the goods. And we grew up, as I said earlier, they're talking of Ubuntu today, Ubuntu was then. Our friends were from all races. When soccer teams were formed, there were members from all sections of the area. It wasn't just Indians only, coloreds only, and the blacks only. So it was an interesting phase of our life, but a very, very challenging phase in our lives.
Thank you, Uncle Percy.
As I said, I can talk for the whole afternoon.
I know. I just think I want to do justice to Rafiq as well. But you know, you talk of soccer, and I don't know, Rafiq, if you remember, Chiri Chiri's Cafe was a hub amongst the younger crowd. And opposite Chiri Chiri's was a cinema, which was broken down or whatever it is, and they called it Ice Palace after that.
Absolutely.
So do you just want to remember some of that, if you can, and how they used to play with the tennis ball on that thing, and evening, that was where the soccer was played.
So that was a bit before my time, but I clearly remember Ice Palace because it was broken down and it was a concrete slab at the end of the day. And Chiri Chiri's was towards the top end of the street.
Yes.
And if you went round the corner, Banja by Saleh had a shop. Am I right?
And on that corner, Zunaid Munga and them stayed.
Yes. But apart from Chiri Chiri's, the other famous spot was Felix Cafe on the
Oh
corner.
yes, at the bottom.
So you remember Felix Cafe, Uncle Percy? Felix Cafe was a very popular spot. And I was hoping that perhaps somewhere in the pictures somewhere in the pictures in the book that we would have a picture of Uncle Felix's cafe. But unfortunately we didn't. And you remember Bashir, who used to stand behind the counter?
Yes, young Bashir.
Yes. So opposite there, the Belishers used to live, near Uncle Felix. So Uncle Felix's shop was on the corner and all the Belishers used to live there. And the Salehs used to live a bit up, right? And please stop me if I go too far.
No.
So here's the interesting thing. Today the youngsters drive all these fancy cars that we have, Porsches, Ferraris, and Lamborghinis. In those days, it was the Belishers and the Salehs who drove the fancy cars, especially Uncle Sam Saleh.
Yeah.
So yes, you know, and so that was an interesting thing. The other thing about the cinema, Haroun, besides the cinema that you referred to, the Ice Palace, after the Ice Palace, do you remember where the cricket field was with Vereniging Cricket Club? Yusufi Bayat had a clubhouse there. The Vereniging Cricket Clubhouse.
It used to be Vereniging Sporting Club.
Sporting Club, sorry. That was a cinema.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Every Friday, every Saturday.
And there was another one, Charles Chunaras.
Isup Chunaras.
Chunaras.
Next to the mosque.
That's right.
That was Julibai Chunara.
That's right.
Auntie Julie.
Auntie Julie.
So interesting thing, the cinema fare was a tiki. It's 2.5 cents. Haroun?
Yeah. Yes.
So the other thing about that school that I mentioned was that yes, we used to go to madrasa in that school, And the principal was none other than the famous Hafisa Belisha.
Officer BJ in the audience with us.
I mean, Hafisa Belisha is here. He's a true icon. I used to shiver to go past his class. That is how cheeky he was. But the other interesting thing is that my mom was the apa in that school, in that madrasa as well, and she taught all the girls. Haroun, you want to take over?
Yeah. I think Officer wants to come here to contribute.
Come,
Officer,
Babu.
come
Come,
up.
Babu.
We'll give you a bit of a window, Officer. Ik kan ons vertellen wat gebeurt. Zit Uncle Pochee.
Officer.
How are you, my son? Haroun,
Assalamualaikum. Officer.
we are here.
Yeah.
What's the name?
That's a mic for you, Officer. Officer, do you want to add to what Rafiq and Uncle Percy has said about the top location? You were one of our stalwarts, you know.
Timothy, come up.
Oh. Assalamualaikum, Uncle. Okay. Uncle Timothy is also a Belisha who grew up in the old top location. My early recollections of Uncle Timothy was on his soccer playing days, which we'll talk about a bit later. But Afsab, you just want to fill in a bit about your knowledge of location. Sorry, we pressed for time, so I cut you if you're going too long, because I know you love to talk also.
Haroun, I have to remind everybody today, we all that lived in top location, there was no color, there was no creed, and there was no caste. We were all living as one family in one. That was top location. The unity was something that you can't describe, Yunus.
Gee. Uncle Timothy, do you want to say anything?
And then at the same time, Haroun, we had our teachers at those time. Mr. Subu Pale was our principal at that time.
This was in Vereeniging Primary School.
Vereniging-
In town, yeah.
In town.
Right.
And then his brother Lane Mani was also one of the other teachers with us, and followed suit was late Radha Naidu.
Okay, I remember.
Those were
Uncle
our
Radha.
teachers.
Yes.
Those were the people that was running our education.
But you know, Rafiq talked about the Vereeniging Sporting Clubhouse.
Yes, yeah, where
And
it
we
should be bad
spoke,
and there
yes,
was-
where it should be bad. Now, I know there was great rivalry between Vereeniging Old Boys
And
and
Vereeniging
Vereeniging
United.
United. Yes. Do you want to speak a bit about that? You know, I know the guys used to sit and do walk rides.
Yes. The rivalry was in the soccer team between Vereniging Old Boys and Vereniging United. And at the very same time, when these things were taking place, Haroun, at a certain time it also brought a split amongst the community.
Yes, yes.
This thing also brought a split amongst the community because we were Vereniging Old Boys and that was Vereniging United. But never mind, as time went on, everything healed again and it became one unit again.
That's fantastic. Now, Apache, talking about that, I remember the Belisha family.
That's right.
They used to go to the race course to go sell the cold drinks or whatever it is.
Yes.
And then on the Sunday, on the soccer grounds, they used to have the truck, the buckets, the ice,
Everything
and the
was-
nips.
Right.
And then, do you want to let the audience know how the town came around that soccer field and what was the vibe like?
It was electric. It was electrifying. And at the very same time, my late brother Sam worked at the race course, and all our children, everybody, not only from the family, everybody should take in Saturdays is to take them to the race course to go to work.
Let's put his mic a bit closer to his mouth.
Okay.
Mic closer.
Closer to you for the mic, they can't use it.
Yeah. You see, Haroun, at the end of the day, the thing that kept us together in Vereniging top location was the unity of the people.
Gee,
And as we sit here with Percy, Percy's father was Casey Mestri. Vereniging Launderers and Dry Cleaners. The very, very first in the Val Triangle. The opposition to his father that there was Mercury Dry Cleaners and Steelworks.
Uncle Percy, can you maybe tell us about your dad and his business?
Haroun, you know, we had in the old top location, we started our business in 1921. 1921, about 100 years ago. Now, in those days, there was no machines, it was all hand wash. There was no transport, it was horse and cart using transport. But the changing factor in our lives as far as business was concerned was the Second World War. In Vereniging, there was a British army stationed in Vereniging, and they needed somebody to do their laundry. So they approached my late grandfather and they said, listen man, we've got laundry for the soldiers, we need to have it laundered. But of course, with that amount of work, hand washing was completely out. So my grandfather laid the conditions on the table and says, sorry, we cannot do it. But this Englishman, whoever was in charge of the laundry at the army, gave him a contract from the British government. My late grandfather took this contract and he went to the machine suppliers in Johannesburg. And he said, look, I've got no money, but I've got this contract. And those days, your word was as good as gold. Your word was honor. And he says, fine, what machines do you want on the strength of that contract? Now, just as a matter of interest, about 3 or 4 years ago, just before COVID, we had a family reunion, the Mestre family reunion. And that original document is in our possession. Our original document from the British government is in my possession. So that was a changing factor in our life. As Babu rightly said, our opposition was Billy Falk. Billy Falk was Mercury Dry Cleaners. Ever so sweet. He was a Jewish man, ever so sweet, but he was our opposition. But that was one of the big steps we made in our lives as far as business was concerned.
Thanks, Uncle Percy. I was going to get to Rafiq, going back to the soccer. Rafiq, do you remember any days in the location where we had Vereniging Old Boys playing? And, you know, what happened was the ground was circled by everybody's car. And when the soccer started, and if Old Boys scored, you get every car hooting the goal. And that was the intimidation of the opposition. You know, so I don't know if you remember, there was one guy that I remember was Lawrence Carter.
Osler.
Oscar.
Osler.
Right.
Danny Osler.
Yeah.
I can talk very, very much on the soccer scene in top location. But just before we get to the soccer itself, Felix Tunara, the municipality only gave us 2 allocations a year. Scrape the cricket ground and scrape the soccer ground. Scrape, no lawn, nothing of that sort. But it was a mission to get the municipality to come and scrape our ground. Felix Tunara and myself used to go down to Sharpeville. And we used to go and plead, man. Meneer, ons wil voetbal speel, ons wil voetbal speel. Now that was at the beginning of the soccer season. And like he's doing us a big favor, he says, all right. Now, to get that favor done, IP Patel, White House Outfitters, they were the outfitters in Vereniging. We had to go and collect a shirt. Go to this office, plead to have this ground scraped, give it to him, then that Saturday the grader will come. Now the ground where we played soccer had a slope. Whenever it rained, that one corner water damp there. So we had to ask this grader, the driver of this grader, to please make a sluice for the water to go. But he wouldn't. So Felix Chunara had to come with a big bottle of cold drink. So that cold drink did the trick. That was once a year. That is allocation we got from the municipality. That is the allocation. But having spoke about the soccer, you know, I want to tell you an incident. Charles Chunara and Isup Chunara used to sell second-hand cars. But whenever old boys played on the ground there, the whole of the Asiatic Bazaar was on the ground. So Charles Chunara and them had a truck that was for sale. It was parked outside their place. The soccer match was so interesting. When they came back that evening, and the next morning when they wanted to start the truck, they discovered the gearbox was stolen. So the entire community was on the ground. The crooks, whoever wanted to steal that gearbox, had the whole afternoon to take that gearbox away. So that was some of the interesting facets that we faced. But Haroun is so very correct there. Whenever there was a football match, everybody but everybody. Now we had a dog, including that dog used to come to the ground. And that dog used to run around. And everybody say, laundryman, take your dog away, take your dog away. But that dog was part of the spectators. So these were some of the highlights. And I'm not going to take more time on that. Babu, maybe you can expedite.
What do you remember about the soccer ground, the soccer stories, and the people? And any interesting stories you remember from the past?
Haroun, top location was a town. It was a little town, you could call it. Everybody that was living in town at that time in Vereniging, weekends come, they are all in the location. And unfortunately, it was just so that time with apartheid, that was just a street in between us that is to separate the African location with the Indian township. And at the end of the African location was the colored township, which we used to call those years the Cape Stands. You understand that?
Yes, yes.
There we were all our young boys, everybody, wherever they used to go. They used to go and
Babu,
settle.
you're giving your secrets away here, man.
That was the resting place.
Right, right.
That was the garden of peace, where everybody would go and relax. You understand, Babu? It was at such a time that everybody was happy with everybody.
Hafiz Saab, I was saying this about the soccer because we're talking about that. And I think soccer was a very important part of the old top location because, I mean, that was the main sort of leisure activity at that time. So to my mind, and of course, I'm like a couple of generations beyond you guys, younger than you guys. But if I remember, so I have one question. Who was the most famous player at that time? So before you answer that, let me give you my impression. As a youngster, I say Sam Belisha.
At that very time when you're talking about Babu, the most famous player of all of them was Tilly Naidu.
Oh yes, Tilly Naidu,
Yeah,
yes.
Tilly Naidu was the first from the Vaal that represented not only Transvaal, he represented South Africa.
Yeah, but here's the interesting about Sam Belisha. So here, Sam Belisha is the father of who? None other than Gora Ibrahim.
Correct.
The famous
Correct.
Gora Ibrahim, right?
You see, at that very same time when the soccer was so vibrant in top location, we had teacher Subu Pillay. Subu Pillay was a goalkeeper. He was a goalkeeper. He was a reserve goalkeeper for the South Africa Indians. But unfortunately, for the reason they didn't bring him up for selection, he couldn't kick the place kick. That kept Subu Pillay away from the selection. Something that nobody will know in a hurry, but it's something which is true. He was one of the greatest goalkeepers that we had. Subu Pillay And at that very time, the only thing that was against him, he couldn't kick the place kicks.
Jazakallah Ustaz. I just want to go back to Uncle Percy and him about the famous world soccer tournaments in the location. And what was that like? What was the atmosphere? I seen pictures in the book of Sam Saleh's open top car and was world soccer tournament being sitting in the back.
At that time of the world soccer tournament, it was one thing that was like one family taking part. And one of the people that really, that time, that was really giving time was the late Ismail Ali, which we used to call him the cop. He was the man that was with us at that time. Percy.
Just for
And
the
as we had
benefit,
everybody in the community.
just for the benefit of the audience, Ismail Ali is Chomi Ali's father, Ayub Ali's father, Faisal Ali's father.
He was there.
Yes.
Correct, correct.
That's him.
Uncle Percy?
Well, Haroun, I can talk a lot about the old boy, the world soccer tournament. I was the understudy to Rashid Pochee, Haroun's Pochee's late father. And thereafter, I became the secretary of the world soccer tournament. It was one of the highlights in our soccer calendar in the Old Top location. Now I must tell you something, and I'm going to give a secret away here. Myself and Mr. Baichenya, who was the chairman of the World Soccer Tournament, we used to invite teams to come and play over a long weekend. In July there was a long weekend. I can't remember exactly what was it, but it was a public holiday on a Monday. So we used to have our tournament over that holidays. And we used to use, to ensure that Vereniging Old Boys or a Vereniging team comes into the final, we used to put the teams against our team, the lower teams. So we were assured of victory. Now we knew the main highlight was on a Sunday. Sorry, not on a Sunday, on a Monday, the public holiday. And we knew we're going to get all of the community on the grounds because Vereniging Old Boys was in the finals. But it was something that myself and Mr. Chinya did under the table. We ensured that we didn't give the teams tough opposition. We made sure that there was easy opposition to see our passage away through the finals. Now, I must mention, we made this tournament try and look exciting. Now, one year, we said we're going to have Miss Val. Miss Val. So Baichenya said, hey man, Miss Val, you won't believe it if I tell you who was the first Miss Val. Haroun Pochee mentioned her name last night when he gave his address. Dawn Naidu. Dawn Naidu was the Miss Val. Sam Saleh had a left-hand Ford Fairlane. So we brought that top down, we put Dawn on the back sitting there, and guess who's driving the left-hand car? Baichenya, parading around. Those were the exciting days. Those were the exciting days. But I can talk lots and lots about the World Soccer Tournament, but I'm not going to take time. Let's give the other guests.
Okay, let's have this up.
Haroun, Vereniging top location was on the map, was the soccer hub of the country. As we all know of the past, they used to have the Sam China tournament, which Southern Natal used to play against Northern Natal. Sam China was the grandfather of the late Tambi Naidu. Tilly, Sandra, Ronnie, all of them, their great-grandfather was the man whom they called Sam China. And every year they used to have their tournament in Natal, Southern Natal versus Northern Natal. And Tambi Naidu, late Tambi Naidu, that was still Ronnie and Sandra's father. His father was from China.
Oh, very close. But you know, you talk of that. I remember as a young guy, every Saturday afternoon, I went with my dad to Natalspruit. And our guys played for, I think it was either Mohawks or Moonlighters. So Sam Belisha was at the back, Sandra was in the midfield or back line, and then Ronnie, Tully and Harry were in the front line.
That's right.
So I was telling Harry's son last night, I said, you know, your father was the brain out of the brothers.
Exactly.
You know, on the soccer field, you know. And he had fantastic reading of the game. Uncle Percy, you want to...
Haroun, I can talk about that. Babu hit a very, very strong point on the Sam China and the contribution. Now, I must just tell you quickly, sorry, I'm going to go a little off the Vereniging Old Boys. You know, Southern Transvaal were the soccer union in Transvaal those days. So every year there was a tournament that was held in 9 different parts of South Africa. So tournament was scheduled for the Western Cape, but the teams were so strong there, Transvaal couldn't really match them. So they came, Abdul Bamji, Rustam Ali, Riaz Kaji, came to the old top location. And they said, look, please, Vereniging Old Boys. Now, remember, Vereniging Old Boys at that time were riding on the crest of the wave. They had outstanding players. Players like Ronnie, Sandra, Harry, Lawrence Carter, Sam Belisha, Daud Suji. These were the starlights. And they said, listen, guys, we want you guys to join Southern Transvaal. And we said, no, 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 no. We're a touring team, man. We tour. We're not interested in leagues and things like that. They pleaded with us. And you know what they did? They said, listen, if you guys join, 6 of your players are assured of going into the Transvaal team. I said, but how can you take it? He says, no, on the form that they are, we're not even going to argue about it. And really, I'll never ever forget it when they came one Sunday afternoon to the old top location to convince us. And we gave it a little bit thought and we said, all right, fine. And 6 of our members represent Transvaal. So these names that I just mentioned, they were the stalwarts in the soccer fraternity of Vereniging. But having said that, I must tell you, the highlight without doubt was the the Vaal soccer tournament. It was exactly like something that happened here last night, but of course on a much smaller scale. But the whole town was there. We used to have our welcome reception at the Vaal racecourse. Thanks for the kind permission of Mr. Sam Belisha, who was a senior member of the Vaal racecourse at the Vaal racecourse in Vereniging, and we used to have the welcoming reception there. So that was undoubtedly the highlight. And I've got in my files, which I was looking at the other day, the budget for these farewells and welcome receptions. It was in pound, shillings and pence. It was in pound, shillings and pence. And I saw there something like 36 or 60 dozens of samosa, 60 dozen of samosa. I think for about 3 or 4 pounds. And I said, hell, 60 dozen samosas for 3 or 4 pounds. But all right, in any case, I can talk a lot about that.
Thanks, Uncle Percy. I'm just going to go back to Rafiq. Rafiq, in closing, any last memory of the top location, any lasting memory?
Absolutely. I have only good memories, and I don't say that lightly. That is genuinely the fact, because life at that time was completely different. And admittedly, I was still a kid, and I was about 10 years old when we moved from location to Roshnee. So, of course, the other panelists were much older. But life then was just completely peaceful, there was no issue of crime, there was no issue of discrimination. It was mentioned that we lived opposite the colored location and the black location, but what we all forgot was also that we had Chinese people living next to us in the location. So there's another interesting factor. At that time, Chinese were regarded as non-whites, and they lived next to us, and we all lived peacefully. I think those were the happiest days of my life.
Sure. Well done. Uncle Timothy, you want to say anything? You want to say anything? Top location.
I'd like to say a few words about top location. Everybody was living in small pondokis, 1 room and kitchen. In that 1 room and kitchen, there's 6 to 8 people sleeping. 6 families using 1 toilet. No sewage system. The bucket. And the bucket is right in the corner where I live, where my section is. Each one of us, my brothers, we must take a turn to clean the toilet. Believe me, nothing smelled. Today, in the house, we got 6 toilets. It's not enough. If I go in the toilet, if my granddaughter comes there and say, Baji, look at the smell. Where's the spray? I say, my dear, you are so fortunate to get 1 dozen sprays. We had no sprays and there was no smell. And each one of us had to clean the toilet. And I made a joke. I said, you wouldn't like to look in the bucket. They say, why, Baji, what is in the bucket? I say, pandas. If they make say, Baji, ooh, I say, yeah, you people are very fortunate. You got everything on the platter. We had to work for everything. Those were the days in location. But it was nice. We all lived happily. The Muslim community, the Tamil community, Chinese, all were happy. Well, that's how life was. And still we're happy. Came to Roshnee, we're still happy. Jazakallah.
Khalid Kaji, just before I let Afsab come, do you want to add to the discussion? You also grew up in top location. I see Uncle Rashid Dadu was here. Rashid Bhai, you want to say anything? Please come join us. No? Okay. Khalid? Okay, we're going to run a day.
Khalid Kaji, come. Who's next? We're gonna get Rashid next.
Rashid is there.
Anything that had to be said was said by that panel who's over there. They've covered all the grounds. I told you yesterday that Hafiz Balish's memory is unbelievable. When he comes to the shop, even now, he can tell me the number plate of a person that had a garage 10 streets away. So everything that had to be said has been said by them. And for me, at this point in time, I am saying that the people here need to take something away from here. We are trying to make them understand where we come from. And I think the story about the bucket system, that says quite a bit, because we want the young people to understand where we came from and where they are and where they are going to. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Khalid. Yunus, Khalid is done. Uncle Babu, you want to wrap up? You want to wrap up, last summarize?
Uncle Rashid, you want to say something? No? Okay.
Okay, Uncle Babu is going to wrap up.
I want to remind everybody today we're going to the high schools and varsities. We are traveling in comfort. Our years of school was walking from top location to town. No transport, no nothing. We used to walk to school to town. And we used to walk back from school to top location. It was one of our best years that we had. And the unity we had in the top location, we'll never see that in Hari again. Thank you.
Jazakallah, Uncle Babu. I think, we've got a good sort of picture of what life was in top location. You've heard from some of our elders, and also not so elder in Rafiq. But, you know, I always tell Yunus that rich memory of how we not only live, but how we learn how to interact and socialize with our generation and the elders. It's something that we cannot replicate. And I think the one about the bucket system sort of amplifies that. In today's children think differently. So, Yunus, we're going to wrap up.
Yes, but we're going to ask you to continue so that we move into Vereniging and Steelworks. And because many of the people up there also have memories of that, maybe we'll just switch a few panel members, but we'll continue and you'll continue to facilitate.
Thanks. So we can close on.
So what we do need to do is we need to get Auntie Rashida up there because she's going to talk about Steelworks. Come. Rafiq, maybe you could give way for Auntie Rashida. No, but you must come up. Come.
Haroun. Rashida. How are you, my sister? How are you? I'm good. You, my
Yeah, don't sit with Rashida at all.